Coming up on UGTV. A special session of the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas.
I'm on now. Good evening. I'd like to call the meeting to order. I'd ask the clerk to announce the meeting and call the roll, please.
A special session is being held on Thursday, June 28th, 2018 at 5 o'clock p.m. in the 5th floor conference room for a presentation on local food economy assessment and an update on the juvenile center. Roll call. Johnson, Kane, Markley. Here. Walters. Here. Philbrook, Bynum. Here. Burrows. Here. Townsend, McKiernan.
Here.
Mugia, Alvey.
Here. So as our clerk stated, the meeting this evening is for a presentation on local food economy assessment, followed by an update on the juvenile center. I'll turn it over to Administrator Bach for some opening remarks and introduce staff and the presenters.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to turn this over to Assistant County Administrator Joe Connor to introduce this topic, and we will go from there. Joe?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor, Commissioners. Tonight, we just want to show you the results of a assessment that was done. This was funded through the Healthcare Foundation of Greater Kansas City to the Health Department and Healthy Communities Wyandotte, and as the title states, it's about the local food economy. You'll see kind of a pretty good description with a lot of data in this report. And there's some policy recommendations in here only for you guys, but also for the community that we have in Kansas City, Kansas, and Wyandotte County. So it's a very interesting report. We'll turn it over to Terry Breckheisen, the director of our health department, to introduce the consultants and the team that worked on this.
Good evening, and I'm going to turn it over to somebody else too. I haven't been here for a while, so it's nice to see all of you again. Alyssa Carradine is the program coordinator in our Healthy Communities Wyandotte division at the Health Department, and she has been coordinating this food assessment, and that's her passion. Sarah Hartwing is a VISTA worker, and she's also working on this topic. I will let Alyssa introduce the consultants who did the work and will be making the presentation.
Good evening, Commissioners and Mayor. In 2016, the Food Systems Action Team conducted the local food economy assessment to get a better understanding of the Wyandotte County food system. We contracted with Ken Meter of Crossroads Resource Center and Megan Phillips Goldenberg of New Growth Associates for the assessment. Together, Ken and Megan have conducted similar assessments in over 150 cities and states across the country. And they've also partnered closely with the USDA to create tools to enhance local food systems development. Ken joins us today from Minneapolis.
I'm going to interrupt you a bit. We can't hear you.
I'm sorry.
It's not your fault.
I can hear myself, but maybe turn it.
It's really hard to hear.
Yeah, if you just pull the microphone.
Talk really fast because you're so full of energy. Slow down for my old ears, please.
All right. Would you like me to start from the top?
Yes, please.
Probably so, yes. Thank you.
And maybe speak closer like this? Okay. Okay, so in 2016, the Food Systems Action Team conducted the local food economy assessment to get a better understanding of the Wyandotte County food system. We contracted with Ken Meter of Crossroads Resource Center and Megan Phillips Goldenberg of New Growth Associates. Together, Ken and Megan—
I have to interrupt you again.
Yes.
Getting Yes, Bridget? Now you're too close. Need a Goldilocks rule here.
Together, Ken and Megan have conducted over 150 similar assessments across the country, and they've also partnered with USDA to create tools to enhance local food systems development. Ken joins us tonight from Minneapolis, and he'll be sharing the data collected for the assessment and the resulting recommendations. Ken?
Mayor and Commissioners, I'm very pleased to be here today. I spent several weeks here about a year ago interviewing about 56 people who live in Wyandotte County, from the western part of the county to northeast to southern parts of the county, to learn what was on people's minds in terms of food access, and many of the issues involved with the economy of food and farming here. And it's really a pleasure to come back and with a final report and with some recommendations that appear to be moving forward. I'm going to really outline very briefly some of the financial figures that we came up with. If you want more, there's a whole report that Alyssa has copies of, and there's a lot more information there that I hope you can reference for years to come. But I'm going to give you the highlights, both of the data and the recommendations we made, and hopefully they will be useful for you as you start addressing food in the area. I'm going to begin by just showing you a map of the places. Alyssa mentioned that Megan and I have worked in lots of regions around the country. There's actually discussions like this happening in most every state today, and we've been privileged enough to be invited by several of these groups to come in and do similar work. I wanted to also just start with a image from a cooperative grocery store in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and I like this picture partly because the produce section here is so phenomenal, but also the woman who runs it. She's actually a produce manager. I interviewed her about 4 years ago in Fayetteville. She had started to work at the co-op when she was, I believe, 14 years old. Her mother was a staff person there, and then 6 years later when I came to see her, she was the head of the produce department. And it was a really good example for me of how someone who lives in a community who has a supportive grocery environment around her can actually surface with quite a bit of leadership. She does a great produce operation precisely because she's very good at networking with the farmers nearby. They have her trust, and she really does go out of her way to work with them. And it's also been an incredible career move for her. It happened because there was a responsive grocery store in her town. As I mentioned before, we tried to compile comprehensive data covering the local farm and food economy in Wyandotte County. We held focus groups in specific ethnic communities, and we also developed strategic recommendations. I'll give you some highlights from all of that today. I also wanted to start with a picture of Cultivate, Kansas City's farm in the Northeast. And what I really like about this farm, first of all, I think it's one of the most advanced efforts at urban agriculture in the United States right now. I've known about Cultivate Kansas City for a number of years, and my colleagues who are planners say this is the best there is in the U.S. It's a tremendous resource, and one of the things I like the best about it is that it's located next to a low-income community, and so the food is being grown in proximity where a lot of people need to eat better food. And I think that combination of growing food really close to where people are is a very exciting potential, and it allows you to think of some very new futures for food in this town and the county. I think a new grocery store like that you're contemplating siting right now, if it really featured food from local farms, from that production, could really produce a unique store that no one else in the country could really quite replicate, having so much food coming from an urban area direct to customers here. One of the things that's unique about Wyandotte County is it has 19,000 acres of agriculturally zoned land. That's enough to feed thousands of people. And it's a tremendously unique resource. I come from Minneapolis, where we have maybe 3 or 4 lots that can be used in agriculture, but we are so built up, we don't have this potential, and you really have that right in your grasp. So it's there as a resource to work with. Unfortunately, what's being grown in those acres is shown in this slide. It's mostly corn and soybeans. It's about, a few $1 million worth of product. Some cattle and calves. You have to look fairly deeply in that chart to see food that's being raised by farms here for folks here to eat. Mostly that's going to be the vegetables, potatoes, and melons, about $376,000 in 2012. It's a fairly small amount. We can compare that with the food that people here eat in a year. This is the market for food in Wyandotte County. $476 million every year is being spent by your consumers buying food. Most of that money is leaving the county because almost none of it is sourced right here. And I think when this is happening in lots of areas around the United States, but it's really uniquely ironic, I think, to have a farm county with a very proud agricultural heritage and 19,000 acres of farmland, shipping something like $460 million a year outside the county to buy food. And think of what that money could do to build local tax base, local wealth, local capacity if it was spent right here. We did some mapping of the food facilities. This shows the community gardens and farmers markets in the county, really mostly close to the downtown area and some of the inner neighborhoods. Full-service grocers and corner stores in Wyandotte County are, again, pretty well dispersed through the county. You folks know these stores far better than I do, but I think we were encouraged, actually, that there are quite a few stores within reach of anybody who has a car in Wyandotte County, but not everybody, of course, has a car. This is a map of the food stores and pantries in relation to the poverty areas. The dark areas in this chart show the areas where the highest percentage of the population lives below 185% of the poverty line, which we consider sort of a minimal approximation of a living wage. And I guess the good news here is there are a lot of food stores that are close to where people are poor, but there are also considerable areas where poor people live who are distant from or isolated from grocery stores. And then in those same neighborhoods where poor people live, dollar stores have taken a foothold, and they are very well patronized by a lot of low-income people, but they also don't tend to have a really good complement of healthy foods. Often a lot of starchy items, high-fat items, and they're things that fill your stomach but don't necessarily give you the nutrition you need. Another picture of the farm at Cultivate, Kansas City, a very beautiful farm where something like 20, 30 people have been trained to use their farming skills that they already had to market food more commercially. This is the sales from the Cultivate Kansas City farms since 2007. They shared that data with us very willingly, and as you can see, they've gone from about $100,000 of sales to $300,000 of sales. If you remember what I said about the vegetable sales in Wyandotte County, this one farm accounts for about 80% of all the vegetables that are tracked as sold in Wyandotte County farms. So in some ways you could say it's a small amount of food compared to the market here, but it's growing rapidly, and it's one farm producing 4 of every 5 vegetables that are sold in the county today. It's a really remarkable growth if you think of it from that perspective. This chart shows the population in the 3 counties, Leavenworth, Johnson, and Wyandotte. The Wyandotte County chart is in the maroon line. And no surprise to any of you, I'm sure, to say that the population has decreased 13% in Wyandotte County since 1969. That's an unfortunate reality. If we look now at personal income in the county, the same maroon line for Wyandotte County shows that income has risen 44% even after adjustment for inflation, despite the fact that population has gone down. I think the good news in this is that there is spending power in Wyandotte County to buy healthy food, and we have the job now of building more connections between people who grow that food and people who live here who are spending that money on a weekly basis. Another unfortunate reality, this is a chart showing food stamp receipts in Wyandotte County since 1969, and despite rising incomes, those are going up. And they went up to about $60-some million, $55 million a few years ago in the height of the global finance crisis. They've now gone down to $41 million a year, but that's still a lot of money, especially compare that $41 million in SNAP benefits, food stamps, to what farmers are actually raising in the county on the farms. In fact, this turns out to be 1/2 of all the income earned by people working in food manufacturing. So food stamps have become a remarkably important economic engine for getting food to people's mouths in Wyandotte County. A tragic reality that's happening all over the country. There's a backyard garden in the city that's some folks trying to take that into their own hands and grow food for themselves. This chart shows the income that farmers have earned in Wyandotte County since 1969. This is also adjusted for inflation. The maroon line shows how much farmers spent raising crops and livestock. The orange line shows how much they earned selling those products to the market. The red line subtracts those expenses from the cash receipts to give us the net cash income of farming. Adjusted for inflation, you can see it's gone down substantially since 1969. No small part because you've lost farmland to development. Many people who were farming in 1969 have stopped farming or retired. There's been a decline of the number of farms as well, but again, for a county with a proud agricultural heritage, it's problematic to say that farm income, the whole farm sector, is earning much less money today than it did 48 years ago. This slide shows that same red line from the previous chart, which is the net cash income of farming, but it compares it with the blue line, which is farm-related income. It's basically renting out land. And the orange line shows government payments coming to farmers. These are the three main sources of net income for farmers in your county. Notice that if you own land, the best way to earn money is not to farm it, but to rent it out to someone and let them take the risk of farming. And again, this is problematic for the whole future of agriculture, not just in Wyandotte County, but I see this trend around the U.S. very drastically. It's better now as a landowner to rent out your land than to actually farm it financially. And then finally, I'm going to compare those two lines, the government payments to farmers and the net cash income of farming in red, with the SNAP benefits, the food stamps coming in. And notice again that food stamps are a more important source of food than farming to consumers in Wyandotte County. It's a very stark reality that I hope we can do something to reverse. Another backyard garden. So to summarize some of the economic losses that we tracked in our study, we are tracking at least $450 million, if not much more, being purchased by consumers who spend that money day in and day out, but they buy food that comes from somewhere else. The state of Kansas spends about $2 billion a year paying for the medical costs of diabetes, which is, again, a big flow of money that doesn't have to be spent if we were eating better diets, if we were exercising better. Some actually huge flows of money away from Wyandotte County and away from Kansas. And these are only some of the losses. I didn't have the time or the data to really track those more completely. So let me just turn to some of the conclusions we drew in the study. We spoke with lots of low-income residents individually in focus groups to find out what they thought their issues were with regard to groceries. And the thing that most struck us was in the middle of a very big discussion here about setting a new grocery store, the low-income residents we spoke with said, you know, access to food is not our major issue. We know how to get to stores. We like sometimes to carpool and go with our friends to go have a social outing so we can go to the store. We like to go to stores. We have a better selection, so we often make that a very fun outing. And what we've noticed was everybody we spoke with knew the 3 or 4 stores they liked, and they told us which ones they liked, what products they liked, which price points they liked. Often that was driven by whether a store was offering sale prices, and they would go to one that had a sale. But people were very knowledgeable, very familiar with, and very discriminating in how they choose which stores to shop at. Mostly they said it's hard to get there. A lot of people do not have cars of their own, so they either have to carpool with a neighbor or take a taxi or take a bus, none of which is a very good option. Some of the more specific conclusions they gave us were that they know that healthy foods are available, but they're at higher prices than they feel like they can afford with their livelihoods right now. 19% of all renters in the county do not have access to a vehicle, so if you are a renter and one of those people, your choices are very limited. People described to us that the bus routes do not run frequently enough. They don't run close enough to the stores. They don't run close enough to people's houses. So folks talked about having 3 or 4 plastic bags full of groceries, walking a mile from the bus to home, and having the food get melted or frozen or somehow impaired between the time they left the bus and the time they got home. Many residents said they don't always feel safe walking on city streets, especially at nighttime. And people were concerned about the discount stores, and although they were plentiful and very available, did not really have a full complement of food, especially if you really want to be selective about what you eat. One of our key findings in our research was that people are very sensitive to sales, and so if a store offers a sale they really like, they're going to flock to that store, and if a store is not offering sale pricing, they're not likely to get a foothold with low-income consumers in Wyandotte County. So that's a key thing in citing a new grocery store here in KCK. I think the other thing that we found was that really these are very complex issues. They're not going to be solved by a single program, a single expenditure of money, or something that's going to happen overnight in the next even 2 or 3 years. It's going to be a very long-term work, because poverty is really a structural thing. It's really in the structure of our economy. And people said we need a whole systems approach, where we really take the whole of people and really work with all the issues they have. We spoke with people who work with low-income people who say, someone comes into my office and they need food. And we might give them food, but they don't really have the time to cook it. Or we find that many people don't have pots or pans to cook the food with, because for many people, especially low-income people, cooking has meant going to a fast food restaurant or using a microwave. And so you have these layer upon layer of issues that surface as people move forward, that you bring somebody in and give them food, but they don't have the skill or the time to work with it. So you have to find ways to give them the time. Some folks around the country I work with have had cooking classes on a Sunday afternoon, so low-income people can get together and cook food together and put up a family's worth of meals for a week, so they can store that in the freezer or the refrigerator and work together, get some skills, and also support around each other to have better food. But all of this has to be addressed. It's not going to be, it happens primarily when people really reach out and incorporate low-income people as allies and neighbors rather than as a problem to be solved. And it takes a lot of time, a lot of patience, and there are many, many ups and downs that people go through. The other thing that we noticed in both Latino and African American communities was that they all mourned the loss of what they used to have in Kansas City, Kansas, which were spaces they could gather where they felt really comfortable. And even the stores, the Latino stores you have, which are, again, a strong resource for Kansas City, Kansas, the Latino said they're stores, but not all of the owners are really committed to having us gather there. They just want us to come by and leave. And we need more spaces where we can gather and feel Latino, feel welcome to be there. And there are some Latino business people trying to create those gathering points too. I know the vision of this grocery store when we were here last year was really to have a kind of cultural melting pot where people of different cultures came together. What we found was people are not looking for that. They were looking for a place where I feel Latino if I'm Latino, or a place where I have African American culture around me if I'm African American. And I think that, especially the residents of Northeast really expressed very viscerally to us that if we do not have a store that represents our people and our home and our culture, we're going to feel much weaker than we would like to feel. I think that what this does in terms of the UG is to put some leadership in your hands to really take a very long-term view of this and say, how do we address a very difficult knot of issues together over the long haul by making deep commitments to really having a long-term vision of having everybody be fed, ensuring healthy and safe neighborhoods so people have a good place to live and to work and to raise food and to work and to eat. It includes a lot of very important elements that are not necessarily always in the purview of a unified government or a county commission. One recommendation we made, it comes out of the community very clearly that there's been an effort, conversation among your residents, your constituents, to say we need to amend the master plan to really reflect that kind of long-term commitment and say, here's our long-term political will to establish in the vision for Wyandotte County a real sustained effort to make sure everybody's fed, that we connect farmers with food buyers, and that we really address these very deep issues of poverty, illness, and inequity that are here. My recommendation would be that you think of this as building a community-based food system. A lot of folks are talking about a local food system, but we find that that's a very easy term to co-opt. And so I know one farmer who talked to a retailer who told them local food was anything that could be shipped within 24 hours, which meant that in his farm in southwest Indiana, Mexican food was considered local by his retail store. And I think that really this is about building connections between people in the community, the kinds of connections you can make so naturally when you have a farm that's working in a low-income area raising food and low-income people nearby who need access to that food. We define, Megan and myself define a community-based food system as a system of exchange. It's a financial system that tries to bring producers and consumers into affinity with each other so they get to know each other, they build trust. The more trust you have as neighbors, the more resilient you are as conditions get unknown in any county. And we would really argue looking for building a food system that builds health, wealth, connection, and capacity in Wyandotte County. Economically, what really distinguishes these local food businesses we see emerging all over the country is that they build strong relationships between farmers and consumers. They build strong mutual trust. A lot of local growers who are raising food for local markets find that sometimes their prices are higher than at a major national retail store. And it's only because someone cares enough to support a farm that they might pay a little bit extra, or that they have a relationship with the farmer and they feel like that really gives them some meaning to really supporting somebody they know. I know a farm in Iowa City, Iowa that had subsidized shares for a community-supported agriculture farm where low-income people got church people to donate money so that a low-income person could spend $20 a month to get a $60 a month basket of groceries. It was a very nice way of engaging church people in reducing the cost for low-income consumers to get vegetables. One of their members in this subsidized CSA operation was a West African person who knew how to farm. He started going to the farm and visiting the farm, and although he was on a subsidized vegetable share, he started raising the food along with the farmer. And about 2 years into this relationship, he called up the farm one day and said, "I need a place to throw a party. I need to roast a goat. Can I come out to your farm and use that?" And that's a really great example of taking somebody who you could consider a problem to be solved, but you actually say, you're part of my neighborhood, you're welcome to my family, you're welcome to my neighborhood, and you have more power and you participate in the life that I have in a richer way because we have built a relationship. That stuff takes months and years to come together, but I think that's really the answer for this community-based food work we're doing. I think there's also a marketing campaign that could be run that could be quite exciting. We've now had the state of South Carolina entertain this. We've had the state of Alaska do this. Some counties in Colorado have done it, and other parts have done it too. But we've suggested people do a Eat 5, Buy 5 campaign. And the message of that is you eat 5 fruits and vegetables a day to have maximal health. That's sort of minimum really required to have a healthy outcome and avoid some of the illnesses like cancer. We also suggest buying $5 of food a week from some farm in the county. So we said eat 5, buy 5. If everybody who lived in Wyandotte County spent $5 every week buying food from a farm in the county, and if we had farms that could supply them, that would be $42 million of sales of food products from Wyandotte County farms purchased by Wyandotte County consumers. That's 14 times the current sales of all the farms in Wyandotte County. Seemingly a very simple step. It's a very inexpensive campaign to run. It costs us $500 to start that in Colorado. But it could have a huge economic impact because it would start bringing the awareness forward of consumers that if they spend their money buying food from local farms, they build a stronger economy. They build a strong social network, and they have a healthier and happier place to live. We really endorse the project of the mobile market that I know you've taken up since we did our study, and I hope that that will go forward because I think that's also very crucial to getting food to areas where people do not have proper transportation for getting access to food. And I think the other investment that Wyandotte County or any public body could make is to really invest in the kind of infrastructure that would make local food trade more efficient. Many farmers need places to wash and pack their products so they can safely put that product together for market. Many of those farmers need coolers or freezer space so that when you raise a good crop, you can store it before it goes to market. Distribution, such as the mobile market, but also having routes that efficiently take food from farms in the area to grocery stores in KCK, to other places in KCK. Those systems do not exist because we have built a distribution system that's focused on getting food thousands of miles in a matter of hours, but doesn't do very well the answer of how to get food from a nearby farm to a nearby consumer. We also suggested that the grocery store that you work with to open up on Minnesota Avenue might consider opening a second location once it's established a first foothold in Northeast, because we had a special appeal for Northeast residents saying, we don't think we're going to have an easy time getting to Minnesota Street to shop. We really would like a cultural gathering point. We'd like to have a store here close to us. And I would add that a store in Northeast would be even closer to the Cultivate Kansas City farms, so that you could really build a store around the idea of selling local food that was raised on local farms here in KCK that went to local residents. It would be a very dynamic retail model. Finally, a couple of farms from Phoenix, Arizona that I visited earlier this year. This farm is a farm inside Maricopa County. It's an area not dissimilar from Wyandotte County, and they have, in some ways, a much harsher climate there because they have a very hot summer for about an extended time. Some farmers go out of business in the August because it's too hot to keep growing product. This is one farm I visited in August that was just chugging along fine. This farm says he can raise about $50,000 of food on a 1 acre. He's got a 9-acre farm. And he's got tractors, he's got 20 people who work for him. It's a very strong commercial operation. And just the fact that you can raise that kind of product on small acreage suggests that having smaller acreage farms on vacant lots in the city could be very interesting, but also some of the land in Wyandotte County that's now farmed could be farms of this type that raise vegetables here for local people. An even more impressive example is this farm in Phoenix, and the owner here has basically able to lease land from developers because the developers own most of the farmland now for the tax breaks. And he cannot get permanent land because it's too expensive to buy, and the owners want to build houses on it later. So he's set up his farm operation so he can move every 3 years as he gets kicked off of one piece of ground for another. He says he reported sales of $200,000 per acre on his farm, and one of his neighbors told me it was actually over $300,000. So he can produce on 1 acre of ground what Cultivate KC has spent 10 years building on multiple acres and multiple farms. So that would be my vision based on our research, what we've heard from your constituents and what we learned from the financial data. We really like to talk about building a food economy that's built on building in Wyandotte County, health for local residents, connection between local residents, wealth for farmers especially, and also the capacity where people do have pots and pans and they do know how to cook, and they really have the cultural sense of being strong and cultured around the foods they eat. That's all I have to say for now, and I'd be happy to take any questions or comments you have now in the time remaining. If you want to find either of us, that's our contact information. Thank you very much for this time.
Any questions or comments?
There's a slide maybe midway through where you talk about residents identifying that access isn't their biggest issue. And I just wondered if we could step back through and look at that slide and the couple slides after it.
I'm having a little trouble hearing you here on this side too. So
you had a slide where it stated that the residents that you interviewed stated that access was not their biggest issue.
Oh, that's right, yes.
And I just need to understand that a little bit better.
I think, excuse me. What we heard from people was that we know where the stores are. We know which stores have the best produce or the best milk or the best sale prices. We can usually get to a store to buy the food that we want. But we found that they really could tell us very detailed information about which choices they made in terms of which stores they favored, or maybe on a certain day of the week they'd favor one store over another. But what they said is on really the next slide, which is that there's healthy food available, but we don't want to afford it. It's higher than we're used to spending for, or say, organic milk or a premium vegetable. We tend to go places that are offering sales, and we're more price conscious than looking for the healthiest food possible. So we know it's there, but we don't buy it very often. I think the other issue that they really tracked was just the transportation issues, that it's there, it's in the stores, but we can't access it easily because either we don't have cars, or we have to borrow a car, or we have to wait until Wednesday when my neighbor's going to go shopping and I go with her. And that people really talked a lot about having to wait 40 minutes or an hour and a half to get a bus to go to the grocery store. And then you'd have to wait for the bus and have several bags in your hand and go back to home. And it becomes almost an all afternoon long experience where the food isn't even very fresh by the time you get home. So I think those were the concerns we felt most viscerally. I think everybody, of course, ideally would love to have a store they can walk to, and a store that really they see their neighbors in and they have a real gathering point. That's not something that's immediately affordable, but that's what people were saying they wanted to have.
Okay. In all of the community engagement we've done with Northeast Area Master Planning, number one across the board is a grocery store. And so I was trying to make sure that what I was hearing here wasn't different than what we're hearing there.
Are you hearing different things?
I don't think so. Commissioner Johnson, are you tracking with my question?
I am. I think that, and thank you for bringing me into the conversation. When I look at the recommendations, I'm kind of a bottom line person, and when I look at the recommendations, I'm kind of thinking more along the lines of a 1, 2, 3, because the language that is provided in the recommendations almost suggests, don't take this the wrong way, but it almost suggests that we're not doing these things already. And so I want to make sure that I'm searching for the blind spots of the things we might be missing, but there's a lot of things that we are doing in terms of establishing a public will. I think the public will is there, and we're lined up with our constituency in that, in exercising that. Having said all that, we still have a need for a grocery store or two. So as I'm looking at these recommendations, I just want to make sure that they seem to be kind of 30,000 square foot, but are there some simple ways that 1, 2, 3s in terms of what goes first, what goes second, what goes third? Because the will is there. The community has expressed it. We've heard that. We've been engaged for a long time about this. And so I'm looking for leadership in terms of this is the process, a more refined process as opposed to a broad-based discussion, a more refined process based on the information that has been received. And I don't want to discount anything that you said, but that's kind of what I'm looking for.
Good. Yeah, thank you. And I agree that I can see how there's an implication that maybe the UG is not paying attention to these issues, but clearly you have been. I think the main point I would make is that the issues are very, very immense, and they will take a long time, and they'll take quite a bit of money. It's not something that's going to magically happen with a couple of small grants. And so I think the nature of the research is to say these are really big, long-term, and sometimes expensive issues, and the work that's been done so far is really commendable, and putting perhaps $16 million into citing a grocery store is a tremendous investment. So that's very good, but also that in itself will not turn things around.
But I want to get your expertise.
Yeah.
In terms of making sure that as we look 10, 15, 20 years into the future, I may have gone a different direction than from what you're talking about, that we are not missing anything. This whole notion of a system, community-based food system, I like the way that sounds, but it sounds immense, and I want to make sure that we're getting, the devil's in the details.
Sure, yeah.
We have an opportunity right now that may be a once-in-a-generation opportunity.
That's right.
We don't want to mess it up. We want to make sure that we're using pinpoint accuracy as it relates to building a proper system that will not only benefit us, but will benefit our children and so on and so forth.
Right. Good. And I think the practical steps I would identify are, first of all, knowing that investing a lot of money in a grocery store is important, but it will also not solve it. And it'll be very important to mobilize consumers to really shop at that store and to feel like they own it. They feel like they want to have it as part of the fabric of community, and that's why we talked about the Eat 5, Buy 5 campaign, which could be done in a matter of a few $1,000s in a place like Wyandotte County. Not a very expensive, but at least to start it. But if you really, if the store's presence galvanizes the fact that more farmers can come to Wyandotte County to farm and sell food at that store and other stores, if it creates a climate where other stores start saying, we want to feature food from local farms as well, that is, that marketing of the idea of getting consumer support is as important as having the store. And then the other thing we would say is that investing in that one store will be important, and that store or another store may want to also locate in Northeast so that there's a similar opportunity for people who live there. And a conventional market analysis may not show that that's a rewarding market to be in, but I think the market can be built. If you build, if you build off the fact you have food being grown here, you can expand how much is grown, you can get more people committed to buying it, you can build a stronger sense of commerce around that.
And I like that what you're saying is, is kind of, as we would say in the banking industry, we would kind of betting on the come, and I don't want to dominate the conversation, but to be able to say that the market, if you build it, the market will come, or it's a hard thing to sell to the person that makes the decision as to where a store will be.
I understand that. So yeah.
If there are success stories, there are best practices on how this can be done, I'm all ears and ready to have that discussion.
Well, I think you're going to get tremendous experience from this first store as you move with the store in Minnesota, that will give you a wealth of experience and also more connection with farmers nearby, more facilities. When I talked about infrastructure and I talked about coolers and freezers, you might, for instance, have a store that was not simply a grocery store, but also had a restaurant where people come and eat really good food and hang out. But you might also have storage areas that were coolers so that farmers could use those coolers, bring them to the store and store them there. And the store becomes kind of a nexus of activity and a place where more and more farmers come in and they can really very efficiently get that food to market, whether it's that store or a different store. The store might be connected directly with a distribution system like a mobile market that really is part of getting the food out to where people live. If they are living further from the store, then they feel like they can conveniently get there by bus. So in some ways it's taking steps you've already taken, but taking them in a grander way, taking them in a more sustained and systemic way, and really thinking about this. And I think that's why the citizens we spoke with talked about the master plan being amended. So that's really formal language saying this is where we're all going to go.
I wonder, to what extent, with the move towards grocery delivery now, nationwide, in what way was that taken into account in the study? Was it too new? Is it too fresh? Is it not simply not enough to measure yet to see where that's going? But you can see that more and more of especially the large grocery chains are trying to provide delivery. And at the same time, even if I could have all of my grocery needs met by delivery, it doesn't satisfy that need to have a place that feels, it's my family, it's my culture.
Right. Well, actually, this is a really I would say we were aware of the delivery phenomenon last year, and it's gotten much stronger since then. So in the time since we wrote the report, I actually was meeting with someone in Indiana last week who's running a delivery service, and he was saying, don't bother starting any more grocery stores. They're obsolete, they're passé. We're going to be delivering food direct. What I noticed about that is, on the one hand, low-income people are too busy working 3 jobs to even go to food banks to pick up free food. So I see food banks moving to a direct delivery model themselves and getting it out to people's neighborhoods or direct to someone's home. The commercial delivery services I've seen are really geared only to wealthier suburbs. They're hitting people who have expendable income, who are so busy with a job that pays really well that they just don't want to take the time to go shopping. I don't see them penetrating low-income communities very much because it's not something that's going to work on a fee-for-service basis. So we may have to move to more delivery to low-income people of free and subsidized foods. But I also, personally, I mean, the guy who was telling me don't build any more grocery stores is a friend of mine, and I was telling him I don't agree with him because I think there is that desire. I have a co-op grocery store that I go to in Minneapolis, and I've been a member for 20, 30 years, and I was, when I was in my 20s, I went to a different co-op grocery store, and that's where I learned how to cook better food because the bulk foods were available I had never run into when I was growing up. And I could go to classes and I could meet other consumers, and that process of education and belonging and sort of investing in a grocery store as my store that I partly own, that you don't get from a delivery service at all. And I think that I'm skeptical that we're going to have delivery for any more than the most privileged of us. And I think, well, first of all, the people who we interviewed are not looking for delivery. They're looking for a place they can go where they feel like they can get the best choice possible at a price they can afford. And they're looking for places they can see their neighbors. So I think we're going to have some of that happening. I mean, it may be that this store in Minnesota will do delivery, but that won't mean we wouldn't have a store.
Commissioner McGeeh?
Thanks, Mayor. So a business model like this would strike me that it requires a lot of capacity. So what or who do you envision running a store that requires a lot of capacity, which translates to a lot of money?
Well, I think the stores you've been speaking with in the land, from what I've gathered from that conversation, you have a very high capacity store that's you've been in conversation with, and there is a wealth of experience around the country doing innovative grocery models that we can draw from. But I think it's the capacity and the money is one part of that. What I think is the hardest thing to find are folks who really care enough about the community that they use that capacity in a long-term way to bring a sense of belonging to their customers. Many people have a lot of capacity, a lot of money. They can invest endlessly, but they are just there to take more money out of the neighborhood. And that attitude does not get you where you want to go.
So you want people in the community to volunteer and set up this kind of complex, large operation to provide groceries for their own community?
Well, it will take some volunteer work, but I think what I'm really describing is forming a store format where you take the fact that you are producing food here, and you build the infrastructure, whether it's coolers or freezers or storage warehouse space, trucks, refrigerator trucks, what have you, and you take the food that's being grown here and you make sure that that's marketed very effectively and very beautifully in a local store, and that you're adding to that marketing components that encourage more residents of the county to really support that store and to support those farms. You support that with farm tours, you support that with educational events, some of which pay their own way, some of which require volunteer labor, but you're really building a tremendous sense of, a tremendous marketing buzz by building new connections between farmers and eaters in the community. You have cooking lessons where local farms come and cook their foods that they are raising. You have cooking lessons where people from different ethnicities talk about how they use tomatoes in their ethnic cuisine, and they learn together how to cook and how to eat better from that. Some of that is volunteer work, but also it's going to create economic activity, economic exchange that will build wealth for the farmers here. It'll help stem the leak of about something like $450 million a year that you're now losing from Wyandotte County. And we'll talk about reclaiming that model to really weave it back in here.
So are you suggesting then that it's going to take an entity to spearhead or lead an initiative like this, to do all of the coordination of all these different pieces that you have out there that you've recommended? So are you suggesting the reason you're presenting to the government is you want the government to facilitate or spearhead or lead this type of food system?
Well, I don't think the government can create the food system. I think the government has to be an investor and a facilitator and a player. And I think the government, the UG's role is to really have money to invest in infrastructure, to set the vision, and to bring people together so that private parties can do this from their own business activity. Many communities around the country are hiring a local food coordinator, someone who could be in a municipal office, but could be in a nonprofit or could be even a private firm, who really their job is to really make sure that these commercial connections do get forged. Sometimes many communities around the country are doing what actually Kansas City, Missouri has built a food hub where I think really they have a warehouse, they have the trucks, they have the facilities, but essentially their most important role is to serve as that coordinating role to really make sure that local trade can be realized over time.
Okay, thanks. Commissioner Bynum, you asked a question earlier about access to the store and what that meant. So I just thought it'd be a perfect opportunity. A very similar study was done by the University of Kansas prior to getting a grocery store in Argentine, where the community was very engaged with family research medicine as far as getting out there and asking questions of all the community members, similar to what has been discussed today. How do you buy? How do you shop? How do you get there? What happens? And so we did a little more in-depth, broader review in the community, and what came back in the community is that they just wanted a regular standard full-service grocery store, one that you would see in any other neighborhood that not necessarily was low income. And then the accessibility issue was really very specific. Not as much emphasis was placed on how long it took to wait for a bus, because they could sort of time that. This was the issue specifically. You have a single mom with 3 children under the age of 5. They have to take all of them to the grocery store. And the way new grocery stores are building is they're not built next to the street. There is usually a very large parking lot between the street and the front door of the store. So you have to sort of imagine a child on a hip, maybe one child you have their hand and the other child sort of free walking up to the front door of the store, and a considerable walk. Now, getting into the store, you can get there like that. I've done that. I have 3 kids, so you can get there like that. But once you get in there and you buy all your groceries, how do you get your kids and your groceries back to the bus stop with all of that going on? And so the way we resolved that is once the grocery store was up and running, what we were able to do is raise money to build a very specific bus stop next to the street that has a cart corral behind the bus stop that is right across the parking lot. So now what you can do is when you arrive by bus in front of the Walmart at Argentine, you can get a cart out of the cart corral, you can stuff your kids in the cart, and you can push them up to the front door, and then you take them out and you fill it with groceries. And then when you buy your groceries, you push the cart all the way down to the bus stop, and you put your cart in the cart corral, and you unload your groceries. And we have a pretty good relationship with the bus driver, and he helps you get those groceries onto the bus. Now, how they get from that bus stop to their home, I don't know, but it has been incredibly popular, I know, because I see the line of carts that are pushed down to the bus stop that are left in the cart corral when they don't get picked up on a regular basis. So that is, I think, a more clear example of what has been a specific issue. Another way to address the issue of the back and forth is we specifically targeted low-income apartment complexes in the area, and we have a number of them in Argentine. We provided those complexes access to 3 to 5 wagons, very durable wagons that could carry children and groceries at the same time. So now instead of, as you've probably seen if you've driven through urban areas, you'll see grocery carts on hillsides or in people's front yard or a block away from the store. So we try to target those people, and as we see them walking off, we try to hook up with them to make sure that they know where they can access a wagon for free to get themselves back and forth from the front door of their home to the store. I think surely the food desert issue talks about being 3 miles away. I think that's a little far. I do agree that the more stores we have that are closer together, it makes it easier for mobility. And so we have not really had some of these issues. Just dealing with those issues has been overwhelming from a capacity perspective. And so we decided to make it happen immediately, which is what needs to happen in Wyandotte County, especially to address the issue in the Northeast, is to let everybody stay in their lane and try to encourage your partners that are driving in their lane to maybe adopt some of these policies. So one policy we worked on with Walmart is that Walmart, up until 6 months ago, had a policy where they would price beat any other grocer in the community. Well, that didn't work out very well for Save-A-Lot. What it was doing is driving all of the shoppers to one location. Great for shoppers that are low income that shop totally based on price point, but not necessarily good. And then you end up with a monopoly in the market, which is what we had here in Wyandotte County for years, which didn't work out for us. So in dealing with Walmart, we were able to say, we'd like you to stop dominating the market and price matching and beating everybody else out there, because it's not creating the opportunity for grocers, smaller grocers, to locate within our neighborhoods and meet their needs so that we can have more of these neighborhood-based grocery stores. They did that. They no longer price beat or compete with other grocers, which I think creates an opportunity specifically for Wyandotte County to put up more affordable grocery stores. One of the next steps could be some of these suggestions, like partnering with the Turner Community Garden, which is right down the street, and talking to Walmart about what they have, what power they have to, at the local level, buy food from local community gardens. My concern with that is there's got to be some federal FDA guidelines around the safety of that food. And I don't know how these people are selling food that they grow publicly without the federal government being involved in whether or not this food is safe. And there's not regulation around that. So that's a bigger issue, but since we're talking about grocery in Argentina, we've been talking about all these sort of great ideas, and with all due respect, a great study, but a lot of pie in the sky. What the most, I feel like we're at the ER room in the Northeast area of our community, and what we need to find is somebody that is in the business, has the capacity, and can set up shop in this area and have a sustainable long-term business, and then work on some of these other ancillary businesses.
Commissioner Markley.
So I feel like we've talked the grocery store issue into the ground, and I'd like to talk about sort of the other aspect, I feel like, of this study that's sort of new material that we haven't really been talking about as a commission, which is just the agricultural aspect. And you kept talking about how we're an agricultural county. So I think that's interesting, and it's something we haven't really addressed. A couple of land use sort of comments. One is that unless it's changed more recently, I had a whole go-round several years ago related to taxation of an agricultural parcel. Even if you're zoned agricultural, you can't always get agricultural tax breaks even if you're a farm. FYI, that's a problem at the state level. We were not in charge of that interpretation as I understand it, but there's some weirdness there about how people are taxed and to what extent they can get benefits, even if they are zoned agricultural, like I said, unless something more recently has changed. And this parcel was a farm with the business plan and the whole bit. So that's a barrier to people who want to operate an agricultural business in our county. Second thing is you mentioned vacant lots and using those for potentially for gardening or farming. As all of you know, most of our vacant lots are in the inner city, and we have had some back and forth over the years about whether people want community gardens next to them or on those vacant lots or not. So I don't have a solution to that. I just thought I would bring it up since it was addressed in this study that there's been some discussion internally and in our neighborhoods about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, or to what extent we want to use those vacant lots for that purpose. The other thing I would say is things that are probably not captured in here are that we have a lot of farmers or gardeners that are selling produce in their front yards. Everybody has those in their area, right? Y'all know what I'm talking about. Tomato guy or whatever in the front yard. And the Turner Community Garden, too, they sell vegetables in front of their garden. What those people are not doing, what they don't have the capacity to do, I'm guessing, is to get that produce to a store. They don't have that connection. And so if there are grants out there, or if there are ways our staff can begin to facilitate that, I mean, the Turner Community Garden literally leaves piles of vegetables out front because they have so much produce overflow, they can't even sell it all. They're like, please take it. They take it to food banks and everything. They can't get rid of it. If they could get that to a grocery store, that would be amazing for them, because then they could bring in some income and they could grow even more. But they just don't, I don't think they have the, they're volunteers and they don't know what to do. They don't know how to do that. And I'm guessing some of the, especially the larger farmers like in the Morris neighborhood, I don't know that they've always just sold it out of a stand in front of their house. Maybe if they had an opportunity to sell it to a vendor, to a grocery store, they would. They just don't know how to make that connection. So I did think that was an interesting part of this study that hasn't come up before, as we've been talking about grocery stores specifically, is we do have a lot of agriculture going on, and we have some operations where people are buying and selling produce. They're just not doing it in the more commercial way where the Walmart or the Save-A-Lot or the market is getting a hold of that food and reselling it to our residents. So I would be all for any ideas on how to facilitate that connection so that those community gardens or those community gardeners can sell that produce in a more commercialized way.
So we're going to end the conversation. Thank you so much. We have another presentation coming up. We appreciate this.
Thank you very much for your time.
Now we'll move on to our next topic, which is an update on the juvenile center.
Thank you, Mayor. As our team is transitioning in, I'll do a little bit of setup for this. This is, as you know, we approved a large juvenile center project to improve the services that we are able to provide in our community. So tonight, the intent is to go through and give you an update of where we are, how the design for this center is turning out. It's also a request, as we've gone through this project, we found that the costs are, not to take away the punchline, but the costs are increasing above where we'd anticipated them to be. So we wanted to identify this to you, and bottom line is I'm going to need a little bit more money to complete the project as we anticipated. But I will let the team go through and explain this. So glad to have Sheriff Ash with us tonight. Appreciate you being here. I believe I turned this project over to Jeff Fisher, Director of Public Works, and the rest of the team to get into it.
Thank you and good evening. Introductions, we have Lynn Newkirk from Newkirk and Novak, which is our construction partner. Dan Rowe from Trainer, our architect, of course Sheriff, and then Debbie Johnson is going to jump in on the presentation. We're going to quickly go through the steps that got us here, highlight the facility again, describe cost impacts, as Doug Bach mentioned. I want to make a few notes. You might recall we elected to use construction manager at risk method on this. That's proven very valuable, especially as we hit these cost impacts. Having that construction partner on board early allows us to work through those together before we even finish design. So that's been real good. You might recall we also had a lot of stakeholder input. We feel like we have a good design at this point. The parking lot behind Memorial Hall is going to be a huge benefit. That starts, the houses are gone, the trees are coming down starting tomorrow, and then be done with the parking lot in October. And then we'll actually start the facility in August, we think. So we're pretty excited about that. We also have found real good opportunities to incorporate green infrastructure. This is in our combined sewer system. That's very helpful to that, and our OCP, our consent decree with EPA. So we're real excited about that. So I'll hand it over to Dan, and then Lynn and Debbie.
Good evening, Commissioners. Dan Rowe with Trainer HL. Good to be back in front of you. I will be brief in order to be respectful of your time. Here you go. My apologies. No one's ever asked me to speak up before. So. But I will be brief in order to be respectful of your time. I'm not trying to rush through this, but just making sure that we have time for questions afterwards. Brief history. This project was begun in 2015. If I can advance the slide there. In 2015, we did a study on the adult jail to see what the best and maximum use of that facility was and to try to draw back into that facility adults. And part of that study was the recognition that it was inappropriate to hold juveniles within that adult facility. And therefore, it instigated the idea of creating a juvenile detention facility that would be able to allow the existing space where juveniles are currently held in the adult jail to be used for adults appropriately and pull back in on that use of facility. Before we began this facility, the county then asked us to ensure that the location of this facility and the concept of this facility would work in conjunction with any future needs of the courts and jail systems. So we put together a master plan at that time to see how the court system could expand and over many, many years down the future, not facilitate a new facility of juvenile detention that would then be worthless down the road. So this facility would incorporate into a master planned complex later as necessary. When we began the project, we had a concept plan. This is where your budget was prepared from this level of detail. So when we prepared the original budget that they're going to review here in a moment, it was prepared off of a line diagram idea as this. It was a facility that was planned at about 57,000 square feet originally. It was to hold originally a detention facility as the study indicated. It also then, in order to get efficiently developed, incorporated the court system and some non-detention program space. So sometime as we progressed, the scope did increase to include that, as well as then to replace the parking which was being displaced. So those were some of the scope changes that occurred through the project between the time in which the project was originally budgeted and where we are today. The parking that is being proposed is obviously west of Memorial Hall in a step down the hill, because obviously it slopes quite a bit through that area, to have multiple levels. The design solution that we have now has an interior courtyard. Again, this may be familiar to you. It's been a little while probably since you've seen it, but has an interior courtyard space so that juveniles in detention can exercise in this space. The outside space has some green space so that we can control both views in and out of the facility. The main entrance here off of Ann, and then the lower level that would enter through a vehicular sally port here off of Alice Court. The lower level facility is dedicated to secure detention. As you can see, it has a central corridor loop circulation, a lot of outside space, indoor exercise, and then the blue areas are the housing with sleeping rooms along the perimeter. You'll see that there's a gray, it's actually a mechanical chase that surrounds the building. That provides a dual wall system so that, one, we can access and maintain the facility without interrupting and going into juvenile spaces and detention, which is very efficient. Secondly, it allows for 2 walls such that your outside wall can screen the inner wall so that you won't be able to see into the facility, yet the juveniles can see out so that they can have a view of green space. A technique that allows us to give that view for somebody who is in that sleeping room without being able to see in. We have blind controls for at nighttime when that occurs, so we can control both the view and communications for those out. Services are here in the gray for kitchen, storage, light green for the education spaces for the juveniles in detention. Directly accessible is the main entrance off of Ann. We have program spaces of classrooms and multi-purpose type of spaces along Ann Street. And then blue is the administration for the detention. We have added community correction spaces here, as well as an intake and juvenile child in need of care spaces. On the upper level, which is one level above Ann Street, is the court. So we have a full jury-capable courtroom as well as a non-jury-capable courtroom, and then a room that will work both as a hearing room as a jury deliberation room in any cases. We have a couple of small judicial spaces in the back, and then the clerk of the court for the juvenile spaces. And to try to achieve both an exterior that has a very good ease of maintenance, has a presence of a civic building, yet is otherwise welcoming and a non-stigmatized type of detention space. So, and, I'm sorry, this is the view from Ann. This is the main entrance facing south. I'll turn it over to Lynn to discuss the costs.
Okay, good evening. So the 2017-18 approved budget that everybody started with, that Dan kind of introduced earlier on the concept plan, was $24.8 million. We're currently targeting a $27.5 million project. The top line, is this how did you?
Advance the slide there.
How do you, there we go. Okay, this top section is the breakdown of the approved budget for hard construction cost, some contingency monies for owner change orders, et cetera, that might come through, soft cost, and then the total construction project, or the total project number for the project. Currently, our last cost opinion, which was in May, based on the plans at that time, were 28.9, so 29 million. There was a correction desired at that point to get back to the 27.5 number. So we're doing that through cost alternates, deduct alternates that we're now incorporating into the plans, and also made adjustments and corrections after that last set was issued. This is a list of the proposed alternates that are being incorporated into the plans to do that cost correction. I won't go through those, but any of those that you want to ask about, feel free to. These have all been kind of reviewed with the team, the project team, as we go forward. Some of the major, we try to boil down to, why are the costs kind of trending the way they are. So in the original concept plan, Dan mentioned it was a 57,000 square foot facility. It's grown a little bit to 62. That's about if you just kind of work on the metrics of the cost per square foot, that's about a $2 million adjustment. Escalation from the time the project was planned to be constructed versus today, we're seeing about a 4 to 6% escalation in cost. That's about a 1.3. There are a few other items that are smaller in nature, but the soil conditions on site, once we got the soil borings and the report from the geotech, that required an enhanced foundation system. There's a cost for that. The security systems are just more involved and a little more I don't know what the right word would be there. Thorough, yeah.
Thorough.
And then, you know, as we all know, there's a little bit of market uncertainty, and that's really being driven by some large projects in the metro area. We've got the airport, which is getting ready to go and hanging, and those jobs are being bought now. Johnson County has the large courthouse going. There's a downtown hotel. All those things are kind of driving a market here from a labor and material cost exposure. So we're really trying to predict what the market is going to do when we go out and price this job and drive competition into it. So that's our opinion at the moment. Also, structural steel and any metal stud, anything really steel in this job, we've seen since the tariff idea has come about, a spike in that, whether it's really causing a shortage or not at this point. The producers and the local guys, when they're bidding the steel, it's gotten to the point where some of them will not even hold their price through the end of a week. So you've got to lock in with them. That's how uncertain they are from their suppliers. So we're trying to predict what that is doing as well. And we've got our building here is a combination of load-bearing masonry and structural steel. Yeah.
Commissioner Philbrook?
Yes. Go way back to the first one on proposed deduct alternates. What in the heck is that? The captured curtain wall. Do you mind kind of telling me what you're talking about here?
Sure. So there's several different appearances you can get with curtain wall. Curtain wall is the glass system at the main entry and other areas where you saw some large expanses of glass. So this area right here, that is the curtain wall. And you can see that the separation between the glass panels is very thin, almost non-existent. So that is a structural glazed captured system rather than having aluminum mullions that would separate the glass. You see that both, but so this is a little nicer system, more elegant, and we've dialed that back a little bit in some other areas that are less visible. But that was a design element that was.
So in other words, get a little less fancy, but still look good.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
That's the idea.
Well, I was just trying to understand because you guys understand your jargon, and it's like,
yeah.
What are we talking about?
And I would say that what we've done is to look at each of those are through a value engineering process that included the users as well as the architects and the contractors to try to understand the building and where the costs were in order to say, are there ways in which we can affect the cost to lower them without affecting the function of the building? So each of those has a different effect on the building, some of them visual, some of them functional, some of them maintenance, and so we're trying to get those and select those only that would have the least effect on the building's performance. We are building these in as cost alternates, so we'll bid the building as you're seeing it and as designed, and then we'll have deductions for these, such that on bid day, if in fact we're fortunate enough to be able to afford the building, we can include them. If we're not, then we can remove some of those as needed in order to be able to hit budget.
So it's not so much you're reducing the quality as you are some of the aesthetics? That's what I'm trying to...
You have a contractor and an architect.
Yes, I do.
So there are some that definitely affect functional use and maintenance of the building. So for example, if you go back to the list, Lynn, you'll see, for example, terrazzo flooring. Terrazzo flooring is a product that I think you may have in the lobby of this building. It will wear for 100 years, no matter the traffic. Easy to maintain with the mop. You can go to buildings 20 or 30 years old, the terrazzo works fine. That one, for example, is on the list because it is a premium cost. It will affect the function of the building, but is it a premium upgrade that is worthy based on our budget? And so that's why we look at some that affect function, but most of them are quality level discussions that we believe, if removed, wouldn't affect the building so adversely that you wouldn't be happy with it.
No, okay, so in other words, we're not gonna have to replace the floors in 20 years.
Correct, yeah. I think Lynn and I are on the same page that we don't want to have a building that isn't of high quality to be able to function within the building's normal use.
Which would be what? How long normally?
We believe that courts and detention facilities are 50-year buildings.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
One of the things I think at this stage that we were asked to do is to review the construction manager's numbers from an architectural standpoint and our understanding of what's going on elsewhere in similar building types. So your current facility has about a $397 per square foot number, and what we did is kind of check to see, are there other facilities that we're working on that makes this make sense, or is this number high or low as a checkpoint? And what you'll see is, and I know this is a public meeting, and that number on Johnson County Courthouse, as I just realized, might not be published currently. We are also the architects on the Johnson County Courthouse. It is now.
Let me move on.
Forgive me from the commission. Actually, I think it was just approved today, so I think it's okay. The North Kansas City Patrol facility was about a $400. Jasper County Juvenile Center has a lot of similar functions, a little bit smaller, so it doesn't have the economy of scale, but it was also bid about 6 months ago. So as it relates, they are of essence similar in cost to what we are coming up with the cost of this facility.
So I'm just going to recap where we are with the financing on the project currently. Last year, this project was approved to bond at $24.8 million. So in March, we issued Public Building Commission bonds for a total of $25.6 million. The annual debt service on that issue is about $1.7 million per year beginning in 2019, and it goes for 20 years. If we were to issue this additional amount of $2.7 million, the additional debt service on that would be about $204,000 annually. We estimated that at about 4%. The previous issue was done this year at 3.38%. So the debt service currently starting in 2019 on the first PBC series is $1.7 million. If we were to issue the next series in March of 2019, the additional amount beginning in 2020, the debt service would jump to about $1.9 million for an additional 20 years. And just as a reminder, the revenue pledge was operational savings from the county general fund. The Public Building Commission operates as a lease, so it's a lease from the unified government to the Public Building Commission.
Okay, well, I think that puts us at the point where we're at. If there's any questions on where the project is, was not pleased to see it come in over budget to the degree it was, though I think we still have maintained a very good project what we're trying to build, and still think it's something in the direction we want to move forward to. $200,000 based on our current projections within the amount of debt service we see in that fund in the county, it should cover, though I also know that we have a lot of other projects that are out there on the county side that we want to work on. It is my recommendation that we would move forward with the project, and then I will be planning for this in the budget in 2020.
Commissioner Philbin? Yep.
Do you need anything from us on that?
Well,
yeah, maybe. I don't know.
I mean, we don't take motions in here, and this is, when we come before in this type of setting, it's to inform you as to the direction we're going. If this is the direction you don't want us to go, I will be proceeding. This is how we will build it into the budget. I will increase this as what comes to you in the budget is July. They're going to move forward with the project with this in mind. And then next March, Debbie and her team will come back with this as a new issuance for the Public Building Commission. So there will be action for you to take, and it'll be part of the budget process, but if I'm going in the wrong direction, that's what I'd like to know.
Commissioner McKiernan.
I'm likewise very disappointed that we've come in so far over our initial projections, because from the time that we originally got together, our whole thought was that our cost savings from stopping the farming out program would cover not only the revisions to the jail to bring those prisoners back, but would also cover the costs of building a new facility to get the juveniles out of the adult jail. And we've been operating on that premise from day one. And so it's very disturbing disconcerting, troubling for me to see that we're 4-point-something million over that initial estimate, because that initial estimate was based on our cost savings, what money we would have available to pay that bond back over the next 20 years. So I understand that we don't have to do anything today, but my recommendation would be find a way to make it fit our budget. Or show me how we can pay for it.
Well, I guess I will say the revenue pledge or the operational savings, Debbie, as you went through and looked at where we're at on the county debt fund piece and the amount of money coming from that, we're looking at currently we have the projected revenue we think will cover this, right?
In the short term, probably so. Kathleen and I are working on updating the long-range financial plan, which I think the plan is to bring that back during one of the budget workshops. And we're going to be looking at this fund, so we'll have some additional information for the out years.
Thank you.
Okay, now, did you want to say something about the money first? Because this is something totally different. Okay, so this doesn't have to do with the money. This has to do with, I just came back from Baltimore and happened to, by chance, talk to some officers that were working on their bicycles around the Inner Harbor area. And they said, "Oh, you're from Kansas City, Kansas." And I said, "Yes." And they said that, of course, their hearts go out to us. And one of the gentlemen dug in his backpack and pulled out a badge from the Baltimore police that he wanted me to bring back to Kansas City to give to our folks here, to let them know that they actually are thinking of them and their hearts go out and they're with us. And so I brought this tonight so I could give it to Sheriff Ash. Would you give him that? Thank you. It was just an opportunity to let you know that there's people all over that are with us and are praying for us.
Thank you, Commissioner. I've received many such expressions, probably from all 50 states in the Union. I don't think I've run across Hawaii yet, but I have had Alaska. And so there's a great big pile of that stuff over there. It's just amazing the way people have been supportive. In fact, there were people on the ground here from Boston, New York, Chicago, Dallas, Fort Worth, Oklahoma. I mean, they came from the region certainly, but they came from the coasts even. So thank you.
Okay, we have one more question.
Yes, and I hate to even come behind that. Can you give us some detail on the revenue pledge is that what the intent is to give us the detail of how that plays against the debt service coverage in the next, after you and Kathleen get together?
Yeah, we'll bring that back as a workshop during the budget process. I was hoping, and that's one reason we did this now, is to come back, spend a little bit more time on it directed so you'd have an idea, update on the project. Then we'll only be focusing on the finance piece of it when we are working through the budget process. We will be continuing to move down the process that we're moving in this direction, but we will be showing that to you over the next 30 days and working through it from there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our meeting for the evening. We are adjourned until 7 o'clock. We'll meet downstairs in the chambers.